I never thought I'd be the guy to hire a private investigator to follow his wife. But there I was, staring down at the business card of a PI my friend had recommended. The past few months had been hell. Ever since Katie started acting strange, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Her late nights, her hushed phone conversations, the way she'd jump whenever I came near her with her phone in hand, it was all driving me crazy. It wasn't like her. When we first met, Katie was an open book. She'd laugh at how predictable she was, how I could read her every move. But now it was like she'd become a stranger overnight. I'd lie awake at night, listening to the soft hum of the TV downstairs, where she'd say she was catching up on work. But I knew better. She was hiding something. Something big. I finally decided to make the call. "This is Brad Sullivan," I said when the PI answered. "I need your help. I think my wife is cheating on me." Brad didn't ask many questions, just the basics. He seemed to know the drill. "Tell me about her schedule," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Where she works, what she does, any changes in her routine lately?" I gave him everything I knew, which wasn't much. Katie had recently started working late more often, claiming she was swamped with projects. I'd tried to believe her, but the little voice in my head wouldn't let it go. I could tell Brad was used to dealing with guys like me, desperate, paranoid, trying to hold on to whatever semblance of control they thought they had left. He told me he'd start following her immediately, and we agreed to meet at the end of the week. Those next few days were torture. I tried to act normal around Katie, but every time she smiled at me, I felt a pang of guilt. Was I wrong? Was I being paranoid? But then I'd remember how she'd pull away when I tried to kiss her, how she'd turn her phone screen away when I walked by. No, something was definitely wrong. By the time I met with Brad again, my nerves were shot. He led me into a small office, filled with old case files and the smell of stale coffee. "I've got something," he said, pushing a folder across the table toward me. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were photos of Katie with a man I never would have expected, my father, George. They were standing too close, their bodies angled toward each other in a way that felt too intimate. In some, they were sitting in a cafe, laughing like they were sharing a private joke. In others, they were at a park, her hand on his arm. I couldn't breathe. My mind went blank, and for a moment I thought I might pass out. "Are you sure this is recent?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Brad nodded. "All taken within the last week," he said. "They've been meeting regularly. It's not just a one-time thing." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. "What the hell is going on?" I muttered, more to myself than to him. My father, the man I'd looked up to my whole life? It didn't make any sense. Brad gave me a sympathetic look. "I'm sorry, man," he said, "but you hired me to find the truth. And this is the truth." I left his office in a daze, my mind spinning with 1,000 thoughts and none at all. How could Katie do this to me? And with my own father? I drove around aimlessly for hours trying to make sense of it all. Part of me wanted to confront her right then and there, to demand answers. But another part of me was terrified of what she might say. When I finally made it home, Katie was in the kitchen, humming to herself as she prepared dinner. I watched her from the doorway, my heart pounding in my chest. She looked up and smiled, that same damn smile that had always melted my heart. "Hey, you're home early," she said cheerfully. "How was your day?" I wanted to scream at her, to throw the photos in her face and demand to know why she was doing this to me. But I couldn't. Not yet. I needed more time to process everything, to figure out my next move. So instead, I just nodded, forcing a smile. "It was fine," I said, my voice hollow. "Just a lot on my mind." She seemed to sense something was off, her smile faltering slightly. "Well, dinner will be ready soon," she said, turning back to the stove. "Why don't you go wash up?" I nodded again, feeling like I was on autopilot. I headed upstairs to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face as I tried to calm my racing thoughts. What the hell was I going to do? How could I ever face my father again? How could I look Katie in the eyes knowing what I knew? As I stared at my reflection in the mirror, I felt a surge of anger like I'd never felt before. How dare they? How dare they betray me like this? I wanted to smash something, to break every damn thing in the house, but I knew that wouldn't help. I needed to keep my cool to think this through. I decided to confront my father first. I needed to hear it from him, to see if he had the balls to admit what he'd done. I grabbed my phone and dialed his number, my hands shaking. "Hey, Dad," I said when he picked up. "We need to talk. Can I come over?" There was a brief pause on the other end. "Sure, son," he replied, his voice calm as ever. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah," I lied. I need to talk to you about something. I'll be there in 15." I hung up before he could ask any more questions and headed back downstairs. "I'm going out for a bit," I told Katie, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll be back later." She looked up from her cooking, a concerned expression on her face. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "Yeah," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just need to clear my head." I walked out the door, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and rage. I had no idea what I was about to walk into, but I knew one thing for sure: I was going to get to the bottom of this, no matter what it took. As I drove to my father's house, my mind raced with every possible scenario of how our conversation would go down. I imagined him denying it, maybe trying to lie his way out of it, or worse, admitting everything with a smug look on his face. I could barely keep my hands steady on the wheel, my knuckles turning white from gripping it so hard. I felt a mix of fear, anger, and deep, profound betrayal. When I pulled up to my father's house, I sat in the car for a moment, trying to steady my breathing. The house looked the same as always, neat and inviting, but now it felt like a facade, a lie hiding the deceit within. I took a deep breath and got out, slamming the car door behind me harder than I intended. I rang the doorbell and waited. It didn't take long for him to answer. George opened the door, his face lighting up with a smile that, under any other circumstances, would have seemed warm and welcoming. Now, it just made my skin crawl. "Brad, come in. Come in," he said, stepping aside to let me in. "It's good to see you. What's going on?" I stepped inside, feeling like I was walking into enemy territory. The house smelled of fresh coffee, and everything was in its usual place. Photos of the family on the walls, the old leather couch where we used to watch Sunday football together. How could everything look so normal when my world was falling apart? "Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "we need to talk, and I need you to be honest with me." He frowned, sensing the seriousness in my tone. "Of course, son. What's this about?" I took a deep breath, reaching into my jacket pocket and pulling out the folder of photos. "It's about these," I said, throwing them onto the coffee table between us. George glanced down at the photos, his face instantly draining of color. His eyes widened as he picked them up, flipping through them. I could see his hands tremble slightly, and for a moment I thought I saw a flash of guilt in his eyes. "Where did you get these?" he asked quietly, his voice shaky. "That doesn't matter," I snapped. "What matters is what's in them. What the hell are you doing with Katie? How long has this been going on?" He set the photos down, rubbing his forehead as if trying to compose himself. "Brad, it's not what it looks like," he stammered. I felt a surge of rage. "Don't you dare bullshit me, Dad," I shouted. "I saw the way you looked at each other, the way you touched her. What the hell is going on?" He looked at me, his expression filled with a mix of guilt and shame. "I'm sorry, Brad," he said finally. "I never meant for this to happen. It just did." I could feel my blood boiling. "You never meant for this to happen? You think that makes it okay? You think that justifies screwing around with my wife?" He flinched at my words, looking down at his hands. "I'm not proud of it," he said quietly. "But Katie, she came to me, Brad. She was feeling lost, confused. We started talking, and one thing led to another. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "So you're blaming her?" I spat. "You're saying this is her fault?" "No," he exclaimed, looking up at me with panic in his eyes. "No, I'm not blaming her. I'm just saying it wasn't planned. It wasn't intentional." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My father, the man I had looked up to my whole life, was trying to downplay what he'd done. "Do you love her?" I asked, my voice raw with emotion. He hesitated, and in that moment, I knew the answer. I, I don't know, he said finally. I care about her, Brad, but I never wanted to hurt you. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. You care about her, I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. You care about her, but what about me? What about your son? He reached out, trying to touch my arm, but I jerked away. Brad, please, he pleaded. I know I've hurt you, but no, I shouted, cutting him off. You don't get to play the victim here. You don't get to pretend like this is some tragic love story. You betrayed me. You betrayed Mom. George's face crumpled, and for a moment I thought he might cry. I'm so sorry, son, he whispered. I never wanted this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. But his words meant nothing to me now. All I could see was red. I don't want your apologies, I said coldly. I want you to end it. I want you to stay away from Katie. Forever. He nodded, his expression filled with regret. I understand, he said quietly. I'll end it. I promise. I turned to leave, my body trembling with anger and pain. But just as I reached the door, something inside me snapped. I turned back to him, my eyes blazing. And don't think for a second that I'll ever forgive you for this, I snarled. You're dead to me, Dad. I slammed the door behind me and stormed out, my mind racing with anger and betrayal. I couldn't believe what I had just heard. My own father of all people. How could he do this to me? How could Katie do this to me? I drove home, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed to confront Katie now. I needed to hear it from her, to see if she'd have the guts to admit what she'd done. When I got home, she was sitting in the living room, her phone in her hand. She looked up as I walked in, her face lighting up with that same damn smile. Hey, you're back, she said cheerfully. How was your... Cut the crap, Katie, I snapped, my voice sharp. We need to talk. Her smile faltered, her eyes narrowing with confusion. What's wrong? She asked, setting her phone down. What happened? I felt the rage bubbling up inside me, threatening to overflow. What happened? I repeated, my voice rising. I found out what's been going on between you and my father. That's what happened. Her face went pale and she looked like she'd been slapped. Brad, I can explain, she stammered. Explain, I shouted. What the hell is there to explain? You've been sneaking around behind my back, with my father of all people. How could you do this to me? Tears welled up in her eyes and she shook her head. It's not what you think, she whispered. I didn't mean for this to happen. Don't, I cut her off, my voice filled with venom. Don't you dare play the victim here. You made a choice, Katie. You chose to betray me, to destroy our marriage. Why? Why him? She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. I don't know, she cried. I was confused. I felt so lost, so disconnected. And George, he was there. He listened. He understood. I felt a fresh wave of anger. So you decided to screw my father because he was a good listener? That's your excuse? Katie shook her head, her shoulders shaking with sobs. No, Brad, it's not like that, she said, her voice barely audible. I never meant to hurt you. But you did, I said, my voice cold and hard. You hurt me more than I ever thought possible, and I don't think I can ever forgive you for this. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears, her face pleading. Brad, please, she whispered. I love you. I want to make this right. I want to fix things. But I had heard enough. I turned away, unable to look at her any longer. I don't think you can, I said quietly. I don't think we can come back from this. I walked out of the room, leaving her sobbing on the couch. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. Nothing would ever be the same again. After that explosive confrontation with Katie, I spent the next few days in a haze of anger and disbelief. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was her with him, my father. My mind kept replaying our conversation, the way she looked at me with those tear-filled eyes, the tremble in her voice as she tried to justify what she'd done. I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was right there in front of me. And yet a part of me still felt like I was missing something, like there was more to the story than she was letting on. I called Brad, the PI, again. I need more, I said, my voice tight with frustration. I need to know everything. How long has this been going on? How deep does it go? Brad was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Meet me at my office. I've been looking into it. There's more you need to see." I felt my stomach tighten at his words. More? What the hell else could there be? I drove to his office in a daze, my mind racing with possibilities. When I arrived, Brad was waiting for me with a grim expression on his face. "Brad," I said, my voice strained, "just tell me, what did you find?" He motioned for me to sit down, then pulled out another folder, thicker than the last. "I've been digging a little deeper since we last spoke," he began, "and I found some things you need to know." He opened the folder and laid out a series of photos and documents. At first, they looked like more of the same. Katie and my father together, in places they shouldn't have been. But as I flipped through them, I started to notice something. These photos weren't recent. Some of them were from months ago, even years. "This isn't new," Brad said quietly. "This thing between them, it's been going on for a while." My heart sank as I took in the photos, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Brad hesitated, then said, "At least 2 years, maybe longer." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. 2 years? This wasn't some recent mistake, some fleeting indiscretion. This was a long, drawn-out affair, one that had been going on right under my nose. My head started to spin, and I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. 2 years, I muttered, more to myself than to Brad. How the hell could I have been so blind? Brad gave me a sympathetic look. "It's not your fault, Brad," he said. "They were careful. They covered their tracks well. But there's more you need to know." He pulled out another set of documents, this time bank statements and phone records. "I traced some of their communications," he explained, "and it looks like Katie has been funneling money into a separate account, one that's linked to your father." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. "So she's not just cheating on me," I said slowly. "She's been giving him money too?" Brad nodded. "It appears that way." "I'm sorry, Brad. I know this is a lot to take in." I sat there, staring at the evidence in front of me, feeling like my whole world was crashing down around me. It was worse than I ever could have imagined. My wife and my father betraying me in every way possible, emotionally, physically, even financially. I didn't know what to do, what to think. All I knew was that I needed answers. I left Brad's office in a daze, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. I drove back home, not even sure of what I was going to say, how I was going to confront Katie with this new information. But I knew I couldn't keep it bottled up any longer. I needed to know the truth. When I got home, Katie was sitting on the couch, her eyes puffy and red from crying. She looked up as I entered, her expression a mix of fear and guilt. "Brad," she started, but I cut her off. "How long?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. "How long has this been going on between you and my father?" She looked taken aback, her mouth opening and closing, like a fish gasping for air. "What? What do you mean?" she stammered. "Don't play dumb with me, Katie," I snapped, throwing the new set of photos onto the coffee table. 2 years. It's been going on for 2 damn years. How could you do this to me?" Katie's face went pale, her eyes wide with shock. I didn't want to hurt you," she whispered. "Bullshit," I shouted, feeling my anger boil over. "You didn't care about hurting me. You've been lying to me for years. You've been sleeping with my father, giving him money. God, Katie, what the hell is wrong with you?" She started to cry again, covering her face with her hands. "I was confused," she sobbed. "I didn't know what I was doing." "Don't give me that crap," I snarled. "I want the truth, all of it. How did this start? Why him?" She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and guilt. I've always been drawn to him," she admitted, "even before we got married. There was just something about him. And after your mom died, I don't know. I felt like he needed me, like I could be there for him. I felt like I was going to be sick. So you thought what? You'd just start screwing him to comfort him? Is that it?" Katie flinched at my words, her tears falling faster. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she cried. "But yes, after your mom passed away, we got closer. I started going over there to check on him, to make sure he was okay. And I don't know, Brad. One thing led to another. And you just kept it going? I pressed, my voice filled with disgust. For years. What about me, Katie? What about our marriage? She looked down, her shoulders slumping in defeat. I thought I could manage it, she whispered. I thought I could keep it separate. But I was wrong. I was so wrong. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. All this time, all the lies, the deceit. And for what? Because she was infatuated with my father? So you were in love with him? I asked, my voice filled with bitter disbelief. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. I think so, she said softly. I don't know. I was confused, Brad. I didn't know how to deal with my feelings. Confuse, I repeated, feeling a wave of anger wash over me. You think that's an excuse? You think that makes any of this okay? She shook her head, her tears falling freely now. No, she whispered. I know it doesn't. I know I've hurt you in ways I can never take back. But please, Brad, I didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't want to lose you. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. Didn't want to lose me? You lost me the moment you decided to jump into bed with my father. You destroyed everything we had, Katie. For what? A fling? A fantasy? She reached out, trying to take my hand, but I pulled away. Please, Brad, she pleaded. I want to make this right. I want to fix things. But I could feel the rage boiling inside me, a rage I had never felt before. Fix things? I snapped. How do you fix this, Katie? How do you fix years of lies and betrayal? How do you fix fucking my father? She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no pity, just anger and a deep, burning sense of betrayal. I turned away, unable to look at her any longer. I don't think there's any fixing this, I said quietly. You've made your choice. Now you have to live with it. I walked out of the room, leaving her sobbing behind me, my heart shattered into a million pieces. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I could never look at Katie the same way again, and I could never forgive her for what she had done. I traced some of their communications, he explained, and it looks like Katie has been funneling money into a separate account, one that's linked to your father. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. So she's not just cheating on me, I said slowly. She's been giving him money too? Brad nodded. It appears that way. I'm sorry, Brad. I know this is a lot to take in. I sat there, staring at the evidence in front of me, feeling like my whole world was crashing down around me. It was worse than I ever could have imagined. My wife and my father betraying me in every way possible, emotionally, physically, even financially. I didn't know what to do, what to think. All I knew was that I needed answers. I left Brad's office in a daze, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. I drove back home, not even sure of what I was going to say, how I was going to confront Katie with this new information. But I knew I couldn't keep it bottled up any longer. I needed to know the truth. When I got home, Katie was sitting on the couch, her eyes puffy and red from crying. She looked up as I entered, her expression a mix of fear and guilt. Brad, she started, but I cut her off. How long, I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. How long has this been going on between you and my father? She looked taken aback, her mouth opening and closing, like a fish gasping for air. What? What do you mean? She stammered. Don't play dumb with me, Katie, I snapped, throwing the new set of photos onto the coffee table. 2 years. It's been going on for 2 damn years. How could you do this to me? Katie's face went pale, her eyes wide with shock. I didn't want to hurt you, she whispered. Bullshit, I shouted, feeling my anger boil over. You didn't care about hurting me. You've been lying to me for years. You've been sleeping with my father, giving him money. God, Katie, what the hell is wrong with you? She started to cry again, covering her face with her hands. I was confused, she sobbed. I didn't know what I was doing. Don't give me that crap, I snarled. I want the truth, all of it. How did this start? Why him? She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and guilt. I've always been drawn to him, she admitted, even before we got married. There was just something about him. And after your mom died, I don't know. I felt like he needed me, like I could be there for him. I felt like I was going to be sick. So you thought what? You just start screwing him to comfort him? Is that it? Katie flinched at my words, her tears falling faster. I didn't mean for it to happen, she cried. But yes, after your mom passed away, we got closer. I started going over there to check on him, to make sure he was okay. And I don't know, Brad. One thing led to another. And you just kept it going? I pressed, my voice filled with disgust. For years. What about me, Katie? What about our marriage? She looked down, her shoulders slumping in defeat. I thought I could manage it, she whispered. I thought I could keep it separate. But I was wrong. I was so wrong. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. All this time, all the lies, the deceit. And for what? Because she was infatuated with my father? So you were in love with him? I asked, my voice filled with bitter disbelief. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. I think so, she said softly. I don't know. I was confused, Brad. I didn't know how to deal with my feelings. Confuse, I repeated, feeling a wave of anger wash over me. You think that's an excuse? You think that makes any of this okay? She shook her head, her tears falling freely now. No, she whispered. I know it doesn't. I know I've hurt you in ways I can never take back. But please, Brad, I didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't want to lose you. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. Didn't want to lose me? You lost me the moment you decided to jump into bed with my father. You destroyed everything we had, Katie. For what? A fling? A fantasy? She reached out, trying to take my hand, but I pulled away. Please, Brad, she pleaded. I want to make this right. I want to fix things. But I could feel the rage boiling inside me, a rage I had never felt before. Fix things? I snapped. How do you fix this, Katie? How do you fix years of lies and betrayal? How do you fix fucking my father? She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no pity, just anger and a deep, burning sense of betrayal. I turned away, unable to look at her any longer. I don't think there's any fixing this, I said quietly. You've made your choice. Now you have to live with it. I walked out of the room, leaving her sobbing behind me, my heart shattered into a million pieces. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I could never look at Katie the same way again, and I could never forgive her for what she had done. Brad, she started, but I held up a hand. Just tell me the truth, I said, my voice tired. No more lies, no more bullshit. Why him? Why my father? She looked down, her hands trembling. I've always been drawn to him, she admitted. Even before we got married, I thought it was just a silly crush. But after your mom died, I don't know. I felt like I could finally act on it. Act on it, I repeated, my voice filled with disbelief. You mean you started sleeping with him? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, Brad. I really am. But I couldn't help how I felt. I was in love with him. I thought maybe he felt the same way. And what about me? I demanded. Did you ever love me? Or was I just some placeholder until you could get to him? She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. I did love you, she cried. But I was confused. I didn't know what I wanted. I felt a wave of disgust. So you just decided to play with both of us? I snapped. You used me to get closer to him. You used him to, what? Fulfill some twisted fantasy? She shook her head, her tears falling faster. I didn't mean for it to be like this, she whispered. I didn't know how to handle my feelings. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. All this time I thought she'd love me, but now I realized I was just a pawn in her game, a way for her to live out some sick, twisted dream. I felt a fresh wave of anger wash over me. You're pathetic, I said coldly. Both of you. You deserve each other. She looked up at me, her face filled with anguish. Brad, please, she begged. I want to make this right. I want to fix things. But I had heard enough. No, I said firmly. You can't fix this. You've destroyed everything. I'm done with you, Katie. I'm done with both of you. I turned and walked out, my heart heavy with the weight of betrayal. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew one thing. I couldn't stay in this place any longer. Not with her, not with him. As I drove away, I felt a strange sense of relief, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I was done. Done with the lies, the deceit, the betrayal. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt free. I thought I was done with her, done with all the lies and deceit. But just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, life had one more cruel surprise waiting for me. I'd been staying with my friend, trying to figure out what the hell to do next. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. My mind was consumed with thoughts of Katie and my father, the betrayal they'd committed, and how they'd both destroyed everything we had. But then Katie called me. I almost didn't pick up, but something in me, some sick, masochistic curiosity, compelled me to answer. Her voice was soft, trembling, different from the defiant tone she'd had before. "Brad," she said quietly, "can you please come over? I need to talk to you. It's important." I wanted to tell her to go to hell, but instead I found myself driving back to our house. Maybe it was because a part of me still wanted answers, or maybe I just wanted to see her one more time, to confirm that I was doing the right thing by leaving her. When I arrived, Katie was sitting on the couch, her face pale and her eyes red from crying. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But the anger was still too fresh, too raw. "What do you want, Katie?" I asked coldly, standing by the door, ready to leave at any moment. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and filled with fear. "I need to tell you something," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Something, something I should have told you before." I crossed my arms, my patience wearing thin. "What is it?" I demanded. "Another lie? Another secret?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I'm pregnant," she said softly. For a moment I just stood there, stunned into silence. Pregnant? We talked about having more kids, sure, but after everything that had happened, I couldn't even begin to process what she was saying. "Pregnant," I repeated, my voice filled with disbelief. "You're pregnant now?" She nodded, her shoulders trembling. "I'm 3 months along," she said. "And, Brad, there's more." I felt a chill run down my spine. "More?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "What more could there possibly be?" She looked down, her hands clutching the fabric of her dress tightly. It's not yours," she said finally. "The baby, it's George's." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My knees buckled, and I had to grab the back of a chair to steady myself. "What?" I breathed, feeling the room spin around me. It's his?" She nodded, her face contorted with guilt and fear. "I'm so sorry, Brad," she sobbed. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. But it's the truth. The baby is his." I could feel the blood drain from my face, my heart pounding in my chest. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered. "First you screw my father behind my back, and now you're telling me you're carrying his child?" "Jesus Christ, Katie, how much lower can you go?" She cried harder, her whole body shaking. I know," she wailed. "I'm a terrible person. I've ruined everything. But Brad, I'm scared. I don't know what to do." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "And what about Chase?" I asked, my voice tight with anger. "Is he even mine?" She looked up at me, her eyes wide with shock. "Of course he is," she exclaimed. "Brad, I swear, Chase is your son. I would never lie about that." But I wasn't sure I could believe her anymore. After everything that had happened, after all the lies she'd told, how could I trust anything she said? "I don't know if I can believe you," I said coldly. "Not after everything you've done?" She shook her head, reaching out to me, but I stepped back, refusing to let her touch me. "Brad, please," she pleaded. "I'm telling you the truth. Chase is yours." I stared at her, my mind racing with doubt and anger. I needed to know for sure. I needed to know if Chase was really my son, or if she'd been lying about that too. "I want a DNA test," I said firmly. "I want to know for sure if Chase is mine." Her eyes widened in shock, and she started to cry again. "Brad, no," she begged. "You don't need to do that. I swear, he's yours." but I couldn't take her word for it. Not anymore. "I'll get the test done," I said, my voice cold and resolute. "I'll do it without you knowing, if I have to. But I need to know the truth." She looked devastated, but I didn't care. I was done being lied to, done being manipulated. I was going to get the answers I needed, one way or another. I stormed out of the house, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. My own father had gotten my wife pregnant, and now I was left wondering if my son was even mine. I felt like I was living in some kind of twisted nightmare, where nothing made sense and everything was falling apart. The next day I made a few calls. I found a discreet DNA testing service that could handle everything quickly and quietly. I didn't want to tell Katie. I couldn't risk her trying to manipulate the situation any further. I needed the truth, and I needed it on my terms. I waited until she was out running errands and went back to the house. Chase was asleep in his crib, his little chest rising and falling with each breath. I stood there for a moment, watching him, feeling a mix of love and doubt. He looked so much like me, with my dark hair and strong jawline. But now I couldn't help but wonder if I was just seeing what I wanted to see. I gently swabbed the inside of his cheek, my hands trembling. I hated myself for doing this, for doubting him, but I needed to know. I needed to know if my own son was truly mine. I sealed the swab in the testing kit and dropped it off at the courier. They promised results in a few days that felt like an eternity. During that time, I avoided Katie as much as possible. I couldn't stand to look at her, couldn't bear to hear her voice. I stayed with my friend, waiting, hoping, dreading what the results would say. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart leapt into my throat, thinking it was the lab. Finally, the day came. I received an email notification. "Your DNA test results are ready." My hands shook as I opened it, my heart pounding in my chest. I scrolled down to the results, my eyes scanning the page, looking for the answer that would change everything. And then I saw it. Chase was mine. A wave of relief washed over me, mixed with a deep, profound sadness. At least Chase was mine, but the knowledge that Katie was carrying my father's child, it was too much to bear. I closed my eyes, feeling tears sting the back of my eyelids. I had a son, but I also had a wife who had betrayed me in the worst way possible, and a father who had done the unforgivable. I knew then that there was no going back. Not for me, not for us, not after everything that had happened. This was it, the end, and I had to find a way to move forward for Chase's sake, if not my own. The moment the DNA results confirmed that Chase was mine, I felt a strange mix of relief and devastation. I had a son, a piece of my own flesh and blood, but everything else around me was crumbling. My marriage was over, my trust shattered beyond repair, and the life I thought I was building was nothing but a pile of ashes. I knew what I had to do. There was no point in trying to fix something so irreparably broken. Katie's betrayal had cut too deep, and the thought of my own father being involved was too much to bear. I needed to end it, to walk away from this nightmare and try to rebuild whatever pieces of my life I could salvage. I called a lawyer the very next day and started the divorce process. Katie didn't fight it. I think she knew it was over too. There were no shouting matches, no dramatic courtroom battles, just the cold, clinical dismantling of a life we had built together. It felt surreal, like watching someone else's life fall apart from a distance. But every time I looked at Chase, I knew I was doing the right thing. I had to protect him, even if it meant tearing everything else apart. Katie moved out of the house shortly after I filed the papers. She tried to talk to me a few times, to apologize, to explain, but I shut her down every time. I couldn't bear to hear her voice, couldn't stand the sight of her. Every time I looked at her, all I could see was her betrayal, her lies, and the child she carried that wasn't mine. It was all too much. We agreed that she would stay with her sister until she found a place of her own. She promised she'd stay out of my way, and I promised I wouldn't make things difficult with the divorce. The only thing we both cared about was Chase. I made it clear that he was my priority, that I would do whatever it took to make sure he was safe and happy, no matter what. The divorce was finalized quickly, thanks to our mutual desire to end things as cleanly as possible. The day I signed the papers was one of the hardest days of my life. I remember sitting in the lawyer's office, staring at the stack of documents in front of me, my hands trembling as I picked up the pen. It felt like the end of something, like closing the final chapter of a book I had once loved. But it was also a relief, a chance to move on, to start over. Katie didn't say much when she signed her own papers. She looked tired, worn out, as if the weight of everything had finally caught up with her. "I'm sorry, Brad," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "For everything." I didn't respond. I didn't have the energy to. I just nodded, handed the papers back to the lawyer, and walked out of the office without looking back. The days after the divorce were a blur of emotions. I felt numb, disconnected from everything around me. I threw myself into my work, trying to keep my mind occupied, trying to forget the pain. But no matter how hard I tried, it was always there, lurking in the back of my mind like a shadow that refused to leave. The only thing that kept me going was Chase. He was my anchor, my reason to keep moving forward. I made a point to spend as much time with him as possible, to be there for him in a way that my father had never been there for me. I wanted to be the kind of dad he could look up to, the kind of dad who wouldn't betray him the way I had been betrayed. Katie and I communicated only when we had to, mostly about Chase. I made it clear that I wanted shared custody, that I wanted to be a part of his life as much as possible. She agreed, and we worked out a schedule that allowed both of us to spend time with him. It was awkward at first, trying to navigate this new reality where we were no longer husband and wife, but simply co-parents. But we managed for Chase's sake. There were times when I had to drop him off at her place, times when I had to see her again, and every time it felt like a punch to the gut. She looked different now, her belly growing with the child she carried, the child that wasn't mine. It was a constant reminder of everything that had gone wrong, of everything we had lost. But I kept my composure, kept my focus on Chase. He was all that mattered now. I tried to rebuild my life, to find some semblance of normalcy again. I started going to therapy, trying to work through the anger and betrayal that still burned inside me. It wasn't easy. Every session felt like ripping open a wound, but I knew I needed to do it if I ever wanted to heal. My therapist, Dr. Benson, was a calm, patient woman who seemed to understand exactly what I was going through. She listened without judgment, offering quiet insights that made me think about things in ways I hadn't before. "You're grieving," she told me once, after I had spent an entire session venting about Katie and my father. "You're grieving the loss of your marriage, the loss of trust, the loss of the life you thought you had. It's okay to feel this way. It's okay to be angry." I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. "But how do I move on?" I asked. "How do I let go of this anger, this betrayal?" She gave me a small, sympathetic smile. "It's not something that happens overnight," she said. "It takes time, and it takes effort. You have to find a way to forgive, not for them, but for yourself. Holding on to this anger will only hurt you more in the long run." Forgive. The word felt foreign, almost impossible. How could I ever forgive them for what they'd done, for the way they'd shattered my life, my trust? But I knew she was right. I couldn't keep carrying this burden forever. I had to find a way to let it go, to move forward for Chase's sake, if not for my own. I started focusing more on myself, on rebuilding my own life outside of the pain. I reconnected with old friends, started going out more, even tried dating again, though it felt strange and uncomfortable at first. I wasn't ready for anything serious, but it was nice to feel something other than anger and grief for a change. Katie and I continued our co-parenting arrangement, and over time, things started to settle into a new kind of normal. We were civil to each other, careful not to let our past affect our relationship with Chase. She had the baby, a little girl she named Grace. I didn't ask about the details, it was too painful to think about. I just focused on being the best father I could be to Chase. There were still moments when the pain would resurface, when I'd find myself thinking about what could have been, what should have been, but those moments became fewer and farther between. I was learning to let go, to accept that some things were beyond my control, that some wounds would never fully heal. One evening, as I was tucking Chase into bed, He looked up at me with those big innocent eyes of his and asked, "Daddy, why don't you and Mommy live together anymore?" The question caught me off guard, and for a moment I didn't know what to say. How do you explain something so complicated, so painful to a 1-year-old? I sat down on the edge of his bed, taking a deep breath. "Well, buddy," I said softly, "sometimes grown-ups have to live apart because they don't get along anymore. But that doesn't mean we don't love you. Your mommy and I love you very much. We just, we're better off living in different places." He seemed to think about this for a moment, then nodded, satisfied with my answer. "Okay," he said, snuggling into his blanket. "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, Chase," I whispered, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. More than anything in the world. As I watched him drift off to sleep, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. My life had been turned upside down, my trust shattered, but I still had Chase. I still had a chance to be the father I wanted to be, to build a new life, a better life for both of us. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. I'd been doing my best to move on, to build a new life for myself and Chase after the divorce. It wasn't easy, but day by day, things seemed to get a little better. I had Chase on weekends and a few nights during the week, and I tried to make every moment count. He was the only good thing that had come out of all this mess, and I was determined to be the best father I could be. But even as I was trying to find some semblance of normalcy, there was always a shadow lurking in the background, Katie and my father. I tried not to think about them, tried to focus on my son and my own life, but it was hard, especially when Chase started asking questions. "Daddy," he asked one day while we were building a Lego tower on the living room floor, "why does Grandpa stay at Mommy's house all the time?" I froze, a piece of Lego clutched in my hand. "What do you mean, buddy?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Grandpa stays with Mommy?" Chase nodded, his little face serious. "Yeah, he's there a lot. He even has his own room. Sometimes he cooks dinner, and we all eat together." I felt a cold knot of anger tighten in my stomach. I had tried to stay civil with Katie, tried to keep things amicable for Chase's sake, but this was too much. She was living with my father, the same man who had betrayed me, who had gotten her pregnant, and they were playing house like nothing was wrong. I could feel my blood boiling, my hands starting to shake with rage. How could they do this? How could they be so selfish, so thoughtless? Did they think about what this was doing to Chase? Did they care? I tried to keep my composure, not wanting to upset Chase. "That's nice, buddy," I said, forcing a smile. "Hey, why don't you go play in your room for a bit? Daddy needs to make a phone call." Chase nodded and scampered off, and the moment he was out of sight, I grabbed my phone and dialed Katie's number. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hit the buttons. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, threatening to explode. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Brad," she said cautiously. "Is everything okay?" "No, Katie, everything is not okay," I snapped, unable to hold back my anger any longer. "Chase just told me that my father is living with you. What the hell are you thinking?" There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end. "Brad, No," I cut her off. "You don't get to explain this away. How could you do this? How could you let him move in with you? How do you think this looks to Chase?" She sighed, and I could hear the frustration in her voice. "Brad, it's not like that," she said. "He's just helping out with Grace and—" "Helping out?" I exploded. "You think that makes it okay? You think it's fine for Chase to see his grandfather living with his mother, acting like some kind of replacement father? What the hell is wrong with you?" "Brad, please," she pleaded. "I know this is hard for you, but we're just trying to make things work. For Grace, for Chase." "For Chase," I roared. "Do you have any idea what this is doing to him? How confusing this is for a kid? You think he doesn't notice? You think he doesn't see what's going on?" She was quiet for a moment, and then she said softly, "Brad, I'm sorry. I didn't think, I didn't realize." "No, you didn't think," I said coldly. "You never think about anyone but yourself. You and my father both. You're both so damn selfish. And now you're dragging Chase into your mess." She started to cry, but I didn't care. I was done feeling sorry for her, done feeling anything for her. "I want him out," I said firmly. "I want him out of that house. I don't want Chase around this insanity. Brad, it's not that simple, she protested. George, he's a part of this family now. He's Grace's father. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. A part of this family. Grace's father. My own father. Now playing house with my ex-wife and their new child. I felt a wave of nausea, my vision blurring with rage. You've lost your mind, I muttered, my voice low and filled with fury. Both of you. You're making a mockery of everything. Do you even care about Chase? Do you even think about how this is going to affect him? How the hell is he supposed to understand any of this when his grandfather is now his stepdad? She sobbed on the other end, but I had no sympathy left. You listen to me, Katie, I said, my voice trembling with anger. I'm going to talk to my lawyer. We're going to revisit this custody arrangement because I will not let Chase be a part of this freak show you're running. Not anymore. She tried to say something, but I hung up, unable to listen to her pathetic excuses any longer. I felt like I was going to explode. How could they do this? How could they think this was okay? I wasn't done yet. I dialed my father's number, my hands still shaking with fury. He picked up after a few rings, his voice calm, almost cheerful. Hey, Brad. Don't hey me, I snapped. What the hell are you doing, Dad? Living with Katie? Playing house with your new child? What kind of sick joke is this? There was a pause, and I could hear him sigh on the other end. Brad, I understand you're upset. Upset? I interrupted, my voice rising. You think I'm upset? I'm way past upset, Dad. I'm furious. I'm disgusted. You've crossed a line. You and Katie both. Do you even think about what this is doing to Chase? Brad, we're just trying to make things work, he said quietly. I'm trying to be there for Grace, to help Katie. To hell with your help, I shouted. Chase is my son. He's not your damn responsibility. And he sure as hell doesn't need you playing dad with my ex-wife. You're confusing him, screwing with his head. How the hell do you think he's going to understand any of this? Brad, please, he pleaded. We're trying to make the best of a difficult situation. For the kids. The kids? I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. You mean your kids? You've turned this whole thing into some twisted, perverted joke. You're living a lie, Dad. Both of you. And I won't let you drag Chase into it. There was a long silence, and then he said quietly, I'm sorry you feel this way, Brad. But we're trying to do what we think is best. Best for who? I spat. For you? For Katie? You're both delusional if you think this is best for anyone but yourselves. You've already ruined enough. I won't let you ruin Chase's life, too. I hung up, my hands still shaking, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't believe this was happening. My own father, my own wife, turning my life into some kind of sick, twisted reality show. I had to protect Chase from this madness, no matter what it took. I sat down, my head in my hands, trying to calm myself down. I needed to think clearly, needed to figure out what to do next. I knew I had to talk to my lawyer, had to make sure I had a solid plan to keep Chase safe. And I knew one thing for certain, I would not let them mess with my son's head. I would not let them turn him into collateral damage in their sick, twisted game. Chase was my son, and I would do whatever it took to make sure he had a chance at a normal, healthy life, far away from the insanity his mother and grandfather were creating. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of resolve settle over me. I was done with the lies, done with the betrayal. It was time to fight for my son, to protect him from the madness that had consumed his family. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let them win. Not this time. Not ever. I thought things couldn't possibly get worse. I thought I'd hit rock bottom. But life has a way of surprising you, especially when you think you've already seen this. A few weeks after my last blow-up with Katie and my father, I received a call that would flip my world upside down once again. This time, it wasn't Katie or my father. It was my aunt, my dad's sister, who lived out of state. She sounded tense, her voice shaky. Brad, she said, I just got off the phone with your father. He told me he and Katie are officially a couple now. They're planning to get married after the baby's born. I felt my heart drop into my stomach. What did you just say? I asked, my voice barely above. They're a couple, Brad, she repeated, sounding almost as disbelieving as I felt. They're telling everyone. They're not Heidi. I was speechless. My father and my ex-wife, who was carrying his child, were now officially together. They were going public with it. My mind went blank, and for a moment I felt like I was going, I, I can't believe this, I muttered, running a hand through my hair. What the hell are they thinking? They're saying it's for the baby, my aunt continued, that they want to build a stable family for Grace. But Brad, I don't know. It's just too much. Too much. That was an understatement. It was an absolute nightmare. Thanks for telling me, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I need to go. I need to figure out what to do. I hung up the phone and sat down heavily on the couch, my mind spinning. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could they be so shameless, so utterly selfish? To go public with their relationship, to try and normalize what they'd done. It was sickening. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just sit back and let them drag Chase into this madness. I had to protect him, had to get him away from this toxic situation. I called my lawyer and set up a meeting for the next day. I was determined to get full custody of my son, to get him as far away from this twisted circus as possible. The next morning, I sat in my lawyer's office, laying out everything that had happened. He listened carefully, his expression grim. Brad, he said finally, I understand your concerns. But this is going to be a tough case. The courts typically don't take a child away from their mother unless there's clear evidence of neglect or abuse. I clenched my fists, frustration boiling inside me. But this is insane, I protested. They're living together. My father is essentially playing stepfather to his own grandchild. How is that not damaging to Chase? My lawyer sighed. It's complicated, he said. Morally, ethically, it's a mess. But legally, they're not doing anything illegal. They have a right to live their lives how they choose, as messed up as it might be. I felt a surge of hopelessness. So what can I do? I asked, my voice tight with desperation. We can try, he said slowly. We can file for full custody, present your concerns to the court. But I have to be honest with you, Brad. It's going to be an uphill battle. The judge will need to see a very compelling reason to separate Chase from his mother. I left the office feeling defeated, but I wasn't ready to give up. I had to try, had to do everything in my power to protect my son. I spent the next few weeks gathering evidence, documenting everything I could, photos, text messages, anything that could show the court just how twisted this situation was. When the court date finally arrived, I stood in front of the judge, my heart pounding in my chest. I laid out everything I had, every piece of evidence, every argument I could think of. I talked about Chase, about how confusing and damaging this could be for him, about how I feared for his emotional well-being. Katie and my father were there, sitting side by side. They looked calm, composed, as if they had nothing to be ashamed of. When it was their turn to speak, they talked about their love for Grace, about how they were trying to build a stable home for her, and about how they wanted Chase to be a part of it. We're not trying to take Chase away from Brad, Katie said, her voice soft, almost pleading. We just want to do what's best for both of our children. We want them to grow up in a loving, supportive environment. I could feel my blood boiling as I listened to her, as I listened to my father nodding along, talking about family and support. It was all so surreal, so twisted. After what felt like an eternity, the judge finally spoke. I understand this is a difficult situation, she said, her expression serious, but I see no evidence that the child is in immediate danger or that the mother is unfit to care for him. I'm denying the request for full custody. The current arrangement will remain in place. I felt a wave of despair wash over me. I had lost. I had tried everything, but the court didn't see it my way. Chase would continue to split his time between me and Katie, between my home and the madness they were creating. As we left the courtroom, I tried to keep my composure, tried to hold back the anger and frustration boiling inside me. Katie and my father walked out together, and I couldn't stand the sight of them. I walked in the opposite direction, my lawyer trying to console me, but I barely heard him. The news spread quickly through the family. When my relatives heard what was happening, when they heard that Katie and my father were officially a couple now, they were horrified. Calls came in from cousins, aunts, uncles. Everyone was disgusted, appalled by what they'd done. My aunt, the one who'd first told me about their announcement, called back in a rage. "Brad, I don't know what's gotten into them," she fumed, "but I'm done. I'm cutting ties with both of them. I can't believe they're doing this, dragging you and Chase through all this." One by one, my family members turned their backs on George and Katie. My father's sister stopped speaking to him, and several other relatives followed suit. They refused to attend family gatherings if George and Katie were present, refused to have anything to do with them. It was like they were being exiled from the family. And in a way, they were. They had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I felt a grim satisfaction in knowing that I wasn't the only one who saw how wrong this all was, that I wasn't alone in my outrage. But it didn't change anything for me or for Chase. I still had to deal with them, still had to share custody, still had to navigate this twisted reality they had created. Every time I had to drop Chase off at their place, every time I had to see my father with Katie, it was like a knife twisting in my gut. But I had to keep going. I had to keep fighting for Chase, keep trying to give him some semblance of a normal life. I had to be strong for him, to be the one stable, sane presence in his life. No matter how much it hurt, no matter how much it tore me apart inside, this was my life now. A life of shared custody, of co-parenting with the two people who had betrayed me in the worst way imaginable. A life of trying to shield my son from the chaos and confusion that surrounded him. But I wasn't going to give up. I wasn't going to let them win. I was going to be the best father I could be, no matter what, for Chase, for myself, for the future I still hope to build one day at a time.